A very dark, very interesting tree stump that appears to have been down for some time. It has a blackened kind of effect now, and very nice outward striations that are light. But it's going to be a two-dimensional and a relatively flat subject. We should be able to take a single, Phil has suggested we should be able to take a single light reading here, which would equate to a 5-stop subject brightness range, which is one way to interpret this. And I think I'm going to do two negatives. The second one, to bring up even further these nice high values and this incredible detail, we'll actually use a high value that's set a little lower than the low value.
You have to check the IPAC to make sure.
A little bit of a challenging tripod situation here. Swing this around, I think. Start to get about where we want to be. I think we want to look about right.
Pretty close. The stump is actually slanted a little.
It's
so maybe not quite directly over.
Okay, now this, gotta be careful with this because our first interpretation of this subject, though, is as two-dimensional, and in a two-dimensional sense, we're not going to concern ourselves with the usual high and low reading.
Flat light too.
Flat, very flat light. We're in a woods here, a very lovely place, but the sun is very definitely behind the leaves up there. So we're going to go right to the surface of this subject, Phil, I think.
A little sun coming in on the corner there, don't you?
Let's take a look. Sure. Let me get my hand under this meter. Be careful about reflections. Okay, stays about 10.5, 10.6. Okay. So we're going to use that single setting in Expo Dev here. The focal length this time is 120. My flare factor is preset by default in Expo Dev at 0.02, which seemed to work out just fine for me. I have a variety of different films in here for different exposure scales and different developers. We're using DDX, which is a very nice Ilford developer, very clean and easy to use, at 1:6. And we're shooting on a paper exposure scale of 1.10. That is my equivalent, tested equivalent of about grade 2. And I think we read 10.5, 10.6, Phil?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to set both the low value and high value to exactly the same value, and that produces what we would expect, a 5-stop subject brightness range. We're going to be developing to an average gradient of 0.77, mm-hmm. Which will be a little more development than normal. We're close up, so the next screen gives me the choice now of entering my subject distance, which was in inches. I've set the default to inches, so it's 37 inches. Expo Dev has verified that this is a close-up. Once again, focus is important, but we only have a very two-dimensional subject, so we don't need to stop down a heck of a lot. Number 5. I want to be very careful. Thank you. Very careful here not to move the camera. There we go. Film holder is seated. We're sure we're cocked and ready to go. Very carefully bring out the slide. All right. Flip it over. Okay.
You're going to interpret this?
I'd like to interpret with even a little more, perhaps. Well, we're composing this indoor image in a lovely central room here in Phil's home, where the light is pouring in from what I believe is the almost due east. Ready to go. Now we've got some very interesting light up here to work with. This is one of those cases where we almost have to incident meter this scene, trying to get a high reading out in Phil. Unless I'm mistaken out there, I don't think I'd know what to spot meter. It's there's all sorts of different grays and values out there. They're all high in value, but at best I could get an average value, and everything's closed up here. So we're going to try to incident meter this scene. Now, the high reading This is where it's often handy for me to use a little white card and walk into the scene, which I carry right here with my meter. And of course that brings the subject of, as you can see, I'm not sure if this shows or not, but you can see the card held this way is very gray, and these values behind are quite light. And this may be that we're looking for texture in these values, which of course are different values of gray. And in order to achieve that, we want the value of this card to be textured white.
Turn it still a little bit more.
There we go.
There you go.
And now we can use that meter position. We just kind of take a good look at it. We're going to put the meter right in that spot.
Phil, when you do this, you probably should stand over here so that you're not blocking the reflection from the card.
Very good point. We have a fill card behind me that I forgot about.
Turn it right almost toward the light.
Here we go. As we cheat toward the light, it brings the relative values of these other materials down. There we go.
There you go.
And we're getting about 13.8, and that's in bright sunshine, and it's a value that doesn't seem unusual to me. Subject. We want to get into the shadow, and again, we have a dark side of this card. The dark side being representative of textured black. We certainly don't want to work, we want to work on the shadow side here and keep this fill card in. So once again, it's a comparison kind of analysis. I'm personally tempted when using this technique to often bury the card too deep in the shadow. I have 8.3, 13.8, 8.3. The difference is 5.5. We have a 10.5. Okay. All right, so let's make a few entries here. I think we said the low value, which is still there, was 8.3. I love this machine. And the high value was 13.8. And there it is, 10.5 stops. This one, and now we're in a different kind, we're developing in DI13. And we're going to develop to what is beneath an average gradient, for me anyway, of a normal subject of 0.37, and that makes sense. And we're going to get some decent speed with this film of 91 lens diffraction. ExpoDev is giving me an exposure of 5.62 seconds. So
that includes a little reciprocity compensation.
Indeed. Anything over a second or two. So at f45. And another wonderful feature of ExpoDev, and I'm not saying this just to promote the product, I use this machine, is that we now have on the next screen a timer that presents 5.62 seconds, and it'll enable, just a little ways.
Enough so you can hold it.
There. Can you hold that? Yeah. Okay. You're going to hear the timer. Here we go. 2, open. 1, 0. There we go.
Very good.
Using high and low readings to establish the subject range and basing exposure on the low reading is unconventional use of the incident meter that requires a one-stop exposure decrease. This adjustment is made automatically by the ExpoDev software and the power dial, but must be done manually when working without those devices, as when using flash. In manual use, we make the adjustment by doubling the film speed that's set into the meter.
All right. What we'll be determining first in this situation, once again, we want to know the subject brightness range we're going to be dealing with this particular scene. And the lights are being provided, in this case, by 2 flash units, a key unit up here and a fill to this side. And so it's the range that interests me, because it's going to help us to determine the exposure we're going to be giving our negative. So first, we'll read for a high reading on the key side of our subject here. And I've attached the sync cord to my meter so that I can pulse the lights from here. And on this side I have exactly f16, which is not the exposure we'll be using, but it's going to help us to determine our spread, our subject brightness range in stops. Let's keep F16 in mind on the key side, and then find a shadow, which is easy enough to do in this case. We'll get in a shadow behind the key light, behind our subject. And once again, pulse the flashes. And in this case, we have F8. So we have a difference of 2 stops from one side to the other of our subject. And that added to the normal 5 stops of the subject, herself in this case, is 7. So we have a relatively normal, exactly normal actually, subject here. And I have in my work in WinPlotter developed a notion of my own personal film speed, which in this case, as plotted in WinPlotter using my developer and my techniques, suggests that for a subject of 7 stops, my personal effective film speed is 400. Now, and I have been using that in the readings you've heard so far. But I'm going to use this meter in a different kind of way. It's really intended to read average light, but I'm going to be reading in the shadow side because this is what I want to base my exposure on. It's the shadow side. I want adequate exposure there. And because I'm using an incident meter in a shadow situation, which is not the normal way this meter is used, we're going to adjust the film speed. We're going to exactly double it, in this case to 800. So I will do that. And of course, this meter is of a type that automatically adjusted my aperture as I did that and is now suggesting f11. I'm going to double check that in the shadow side. And we have a aperture recommendation of f11, and that's where we'll make the exposure. We're going to fire one just to be sure that everything's working, including, okay, and the flash units are firing. We should be ready to go. Feeling okay? 1, 2, 3. And that should do it.